So today we are continuing our Exodus study. And I don't know if you will believe this or not, but we've had so far, maybe 5 or 6 sermons on Exodus, and we are still in chapter 3. I don't know if that's bad news or good news. But hopefully at some point we'll finish with the whole book of Exodus and see what the Lord has for us. I'm going to ask you, if you don't mind, to open a Bible in Exodus chapter 3. And we're going to read verse 1 real quick. Okay, Exodus 3. Our teaching today is based on chapters 3 and 4, and the title is a question. What's your excuse? What's your excuse? We're going to be talking about that. So before reading the word, let's have a word of prayer. Holy Father, as we open your word, impress us with your thoughts. Teach us new and mighty things that we don't know. Thank you that you are so powerful that through your Spirit you can, with one single message, teach us all individually something that we needed to hear today. And we ask that you will do that. Just unleash your power today. Forgive me of my sins. Use me, Lord, in your service. Speak through me. And may we gain a better understanding of who you are as we finish today. In Jesus' name, amen. All right. Exodus 3:1. Now Moses was tending the flock of Jethro, his father-in-law, the priest of Midian. And he led the flock to the back of the desert and came to Horeb, the mountain of God. So 40 years have passed since Moses had to flee Egypt because of a mistake on his part, thinking that God was going to free the Israelites with his strength and his power and his training. So he killed that Egyptian, and God says, no, that's not the way I'm going to free my people. And because of that mistake, he has to go to the desert, and it's been 40 long years. I don't know if you ever thought about age, but I'm 41, and I'm starting to think about that. Okay? I'm like, man, 41 years. All the things I've done in 41 years. And that's exactly plus 1, the time that Moses has spent already in the desert. He is 80 years old. And he's a humble shepherd. It's interesting, though, that based on what verse 1 says, he was not even shepherding his own sheep. He didn't have sheep of his own. He was tending the sheep of Jethro, his father-in-law. And after 40 years, you would think that with the mentality that he had in Egypt, that he would have something, but he has still nothing. And you know what? He kind of liked that. Because in Egypt, he had all eyes on him and the prestige of being the next Pharaoh and the reputation of being an awesome general. And now here, backstage in the desert, nobody knows about him. He's a shepherd in the mountains in the vast desert of Midian. Nobody knows about him, and he's liking it. Now, by this point, he's already forgotten perhaps about the call God made for him 40 years earlier. Actually, since he was born. He was born for a special mission. And I'm pretty sure his mom told him that. Now notice what one commentator said about this. He said, whatever hopes Moses had entertained of being his people's deliverer in youth and middle life, they had long been abandoned, and humanly speaking, nothing was more improbable than that the aged shepherd, grown slow of speech and of a slow tongue, his manners rusticized, his practical faculties rusted by disuse, his physical powers weakened, should come forth from a retirement of 40 years duration to be a leader and king of men. In your mind, when you reach that age, and some of you have reached that age, you're not thinking of doing perhaps the things you wanted to do when you were 40. Because you have 40 long years in between. You don't have the strength, you don't have the desire, you don't have the means now to do that. And that's Moses. He's thinking, okay, in one more month, I'm going to retire as being a shepherd, and I'm going to go to my little cabin or my little tent, and spend the rest of my years there, and that's it. And I love it, by the way. No ideas. But let's go to verse 2 and 3 of Exodus 3, because when we reach that mindset, God will surprise us. Okay? Notice what verse 2 says when he's there in the desert tending the sheep of Jethro. Verse 2 says, "And the angel of the Lord appeared to him in a flame of fire from the midst of a bush. So he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire, but the bush was not consumed. Then Moses said, I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. So when the Lord saw that he turned aside to look, God called to him from the midst of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, Here I am." Interesting that at the age of 80 years old, when he thought, that's it, it's curtains, kaput, I'm done, I'm going to retire, God shows up. Have you ever wondered why God just didn't say, Moses, Moses in the first place, and had to bring this burning bush that was not consumed by fire? I mean, why couldn't he speak to Moses like he spoke to Abraham or Jacob? Like, Moses, yes, yes, what do you want, God? And he will recognize that voice. No, God shows up in a burning bush, and that was sort of like supernatural. Because we're used to bushes being burned up, especially here in this area, right? But of course we know that the supernatural thing is that the bush was up in fire, but it was not consumed. Like, it will be creepy for you to drive down 55, oh wow, look at that fire, and you come back 6 hours later and it's in the same spot. It hasn't grown, it's there still. You go like, okay, what's going on here? This is weird. So Moses is looking at this. For him, seeing a burning bush is not uncommon, but seeing a burning bush that is not consumed is uncommon. Nobody have heard of that before or after Moses, as far as I know. But notice what he said, what he does. Moses tells himself, I'm going to turn aside and look and see. This is verse 3. I will now turn aside and see this great sight, why the bush does not burn. Of course, the angel of the Lord here that Moses is talking about is none other than Jesus himself. And we'll talk a little bit more of that later. But the supernatural thing that this bush is up in fire but it's not consumed. And Moses says, I need to look, I need to get closer and see what's going on. And I think there's a spiritual lesson for us here, because we know that the Bible does speak about God being a consuming fire. But sometimes we don't understand what that means. We think that consuming fire is literally like fire that just destroys and consumes everything. But notice that when God is in the bush is not consumed. When God is in you, which is hopefully our hope, Christ in us, the hope of glory, Paul says, when Christ is in us, God doesn't consume us. He's still a fire, but it's not a fire that consumes us. And that's pretty good, because sometimes we have this idea that God, when we're wicked, when we sin, God will consume us. And I don't think that's the God that the Bible describes, to be honest with you. But anyways, Moses says, I'm going to turn aside and I'm going to see what's going on. And verse 4 tells us that when God saw that Moses turned to look, then God spoke. You know what this reminds me? It reminds me of the Israelites crossing the Jordan River. The Bible tells us that the priests were carrying the Ark of the Covenant, and they got their feet wet, and the waters were not open. At some point, I don't know if the water was already like waist deep or whenever, but at some point they kept on going in faith, and then the miracle happened. You know what? I don't know if God is calling you. I believe He is, actually. Regardless of how old you are, old or young, God is calling you today to do something great and amazing. But you need to turn aside from the way you're walking. Because only when you turn aside and behold what God has in front of you, then God will speak to you. What is it that He said when Moses turned aside and God saw he turned aside? God said, Moses, Moses. But there needs to be not only a desire from our part to look and behold God, but there needs to be an action from our part to turn away and then move towards God, and then God will reveal himself to you. James chapter 4 verse 8 tells us that if we draw near to God, what is God going to do? He will draw near to us. God is not going to force any relationship, any mission upon you, but He will wait until you turn to Him for Him to speak to you, for Him to direct you, for Him to draw near to you. So my question for you is, which way are you going today? Is God showing you something for you to turn towards Him? Are you turning? Would you turn and see? And this phrase, when God calls Moses, why, I don't know if you ever asked yourself this question, but God said, Moses, Moses. And there are several instances in the Bible where God or Jesus calls someone by their name twice. You will recall when Saul of Tarsus was on his way to Damascus, and the light shone up. He heard a voice. He fell from his horse. He heard a voice, and what did the voice say? What were the first two words? Saul, Saul. Martha and Mary, two sisters that were inviting Jesus into her house. Mary was sitting at the feet of Jesus, and Martha was very busy doing the chores of the house. And then she comes to complain to Jesus, says, Jesus, don't you care? And what is Jesus' response to Martha? Martha, Martha. What is this? Well, I found out that it's actually pretty common in the Middle East. Notice this. This is from Douglas Stewart. He says, in ancient Semitic culture, addressing someone by saying his or her name twice was a way of expressing endearment, that is, affection and friendship. Thus, Moses would have understood immediately that he was being addressed by someone who loved him and was concerned about him. No wonder when he hears the voice saying, Moses, Moses, from this creepy bush that is consumed of fiber, it's on fiber, it's not consumed, what is his answer? Oh, here I am. He's not like, who's there? Like, what is that? No. It's like, here I am. Because his voice was familiar. Now, this is important because although it has been 40 long years since Moses have been asked to go back, that does not mean that during those 40 years, Moses was not in contact with God. Okay? God and Moses were friends. Which is funny, because you can be running away from the mission that God has for you for 40 years. That doesn't mean that you're not friends of God. That doesn't mean that you are on your way to hell. You're still a child of God. Moses recognized that voice. And you know what? It's important. Do you recognize God's voice? Because the fact of the matter is that sometimes God asks things that don't make any sense. And how willing are we to not only recognize that voice as God's voice, but to obey what that voice says? I have to be honest with you, like if I was Abraham, and I've been waiting for this child all my life, and all of a sudden I hear a voice in the middle of the night that wakes me up and says, Angel, I want you to take Gio, go to the Council Mountains, and just sacrifice Gio for me. Just kill him. I'm going to go like, wow, that was a very bad nightmare. Woof, what is that? What happened here? But how do we see Abraham reacting? Does he question the voice? Does he have any doubts that that is Jehovah's voice? Not a doubt. And not only not a doubt, he wakes up and starts getting ready to do the unthinkable. How ready are we? How willing are we to do the unthinkable when God asks us to do it? Only friends will do that. I hope. There's some friends that can do that. But notice, this phrase, Moses, Moses, it was a way to express endearment or affection or friendship. No wonder later on in the book of Exodus we read, the Lord spoke to Moses face to face like a man speaks with his friend. That's what they were. Friends. And you know what? God's ultimate goal is for you to understand that He Yes, He is the Almighty God, the all-powerful God, the God that we need to remove the sandals from our feet when we're in His presence. But that same God is our friend. Our friend. I fear that sometimes we treat God with an excess of respect. Does that make sense? Like we think of God as so holy that He's unapproachable. When the New Testament tells us that through Christ, now we have open access to where? To the throne of God itself. It says, come boldly. Come boldly to the throne of God. No fear. You can come into His very presence. Because yes, He is a consuming fire, but to His children, He is not a consuming fire. So Moses was a friend of God. Are we? Can people say that about us? That we speak to God as we speak to a friend. So, then we go to Exodus 3. Of course, Moses is there and he removed the sandals because God tells him to do that. And then God engages in a conversation with him. And then in verse 10, let's read it. Exodus 3, 10 through 12, if you don't mind. The Bible says, God told Moses, come now, therefore, and I will send you to Pharaoh, that you may bring my people, the children of Israel, out of Egypt. But Moses said to God, who am I that I should go to Pharaoh and that I should bring the children of Israel out of Egypt? So God said, I will certainly be with you, and this will be a sign to you that I have sent you. When you have brought the people out of Egypt, you shall serve God on this mountain. So from the first, very superficially, we can read, and we might conclude that Moses' answer here in verse 11 is an answer coming from a humble person. Like God is asking Moses, and He's saying, Moses, you're going to go now and go to Egypt and you're going to free my people. And Moses is so caught up in emotion that says like, God, who am I? I'm no one. Why are you picking on me? But as we will hopefully see here in a second, it's really not this humble or meek character trait from Moses. But it's going to be a series of excuses. Series of excuses. So God calls Moses for this specific mission, and his response is, who am I? I'm no one, Lord. This is not only a humble acknowledgement of his powerlessness, because we know that he's already 80 years old, and he doesn't have the power or the desire to do the task that God is asking him, but perhaps some commentators said that Moses was thinking about what happened 40 years ago in this context. Like, God, who am I? I am the guy that was rejected already 40 years ago. You want to send me again? Notice what the people, the man that Moses, the two Hebrew guys that he separated after he killed the Egyptian. Exodus chapter 2 verse 14. One of the men answered, who put you in charge of us and made you our judge? Are you planning to kill me just as you killed that Egyptian? This frightened Moses. So the question that Moses is asking God, like, who am I, God? In the context here, it might be, God, I'm no one. I'm the guy that was rejected. These people don't want me to be their judge. And you want me to go back to them? But as we will see, and I already said this, Moses' question is actually an excuse to his call. Thus the title for our teaching today, What's Your Excuse? And from this point on, from Exodus 3:10 to Exodus 4:17, Moses will engage in a debate with God. And Moses will present 4 excuses, and God will present 4 responses to those excuses. So I want you to go with me and journey through here. So the first excuse of Moses is right there in Exodus 3:10. He says, who am I? And God's response is, don't worry about who you are. Worry about who's with you. And that's very important. Because the fact of the matter is that it doesn't matter if you have 10 PhD degrees or if you've been trained by the CIA or the FBI and you're like this special agent and you know everything. The fact of the matter is that at the end of the day, you know nothing. To accomplish God's mission, we cannot depend on our worldly training. We need to depend on the spirit training. And Moses' first excuse to fulfill God's call of liberating the Israelites is, God, who am I? I'm no one. And God says, don't look at you, look at me. I'm promising you this day that I will be with you. Notice what Spence Jones in the pulpit commentary says about this. It says, Moses had excused himself on the ground of unfitness. God replies, you will not be unfit, since I will be with you. I will supply your deficiencies. I will impart all the qualities you need, and this will be a sign for you of my power and faithfulness. This will assure you that I am not sending you upon a fruitless errand. It is determined in my counsels that not only you will succeed and lead the people out, but after that, when you have done so, you and they together shall serve me on this mountain. And if there's one line that I will love for you to take from this teaching this morning is, God is with you. God is with you. That's God's response for Moses' first excuse. And then, if God is with us, who can be against us? That's the thing. But sometimes our reality is that we are so caught up in fear that we don't see God there. And fear is such a horrible thing because when you are afraid, you can see and hear things that don't exist. I remember when I was in high school, we lived in a very, very, very bad neighborhood in Puerto Rico, which was actually where the Adventist school was, like in the worst neighborhood. Like literally, like there were shootings every day. Like we will be in a chapel. I can clearly remember this. I was like a junior in high school, and we're praising God, singing songs. And all of a sudden, we see SWAT going through the stairs. We're like, what's going on? And then all the windows are shut down, and then police come in and says, all right, everybody put their hands on their knees and don't move and don't go out and whatever. And we'll start hearing shootings and blah 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 blah. It was crazy. So my dad had the awesome idea to move to that neighborhood. Okay. And I remember one night, I'm sleeping, and I was so afraid of things when I was younger. Like, I would be afraid of pretty much everything. So I'm sleeping, and I know this is a bad neighborhood, right? And all of a sudden, I hear like this heavy breathing, like, and I thought, all right, somebody has been shot, and he's like by my window, like right there. And I remember I froze, I was in panic mode. Like I froze, I didn't move, and I was like, oh, who's there? Somebody's there. Somebody's going to come into the house, they're going to kill us all. And I will continue to hear this. You know what it was? It was a dog. It was a dog. Next morning, I woke up because I had to go to school, and I found the dog right there. Fear is a horrible thing. No wonder John tells us that perfect love casts out fear. We cannot serve God if we live in fear. Evidently, Moses is frightened. I'm 80 years old. You expect me to go to Egypt? Who am I? First excuse. Second excuse. And you can read this in Exodus 3, verse 13. He goes, what am I going to tell them when they ask what your name is? Like, it's been 400 years plus. These people don't even know who this God is. If they ask me, what God is this? Amun-Ra, Osiris, Isis, who is this? What am I going to say? I don't know what I'm going to say. And God's response is, tell them, I am who I am has sent you. Now, this might not sound like anything, but this statement of God, I am who I am, it's actually describing the word Jehovah, which was so sacred for the Jewish people that they don't even pronounce that name. And that word Jehovah, this statement, I am who I am, is actually portraying a self-existent one. Not a created Egyptian God, but a self-existent. Now this is powerful. Because if you fast forward 2,000 years from this very moment, Jesus will be in the temple speaking to the Jewish crowd, and he will tell them in John chapter 8, verse 58, before Abraham was, I am. You know what that means? that this angel of the Lord in Genesis 3:2 that is speaking with Moses, that later in the narrative turns to be God himself, the Lord, is none other than the incarnated Jesus, previous to the incarnation. God himself is Jesus here, pre-incarnated Christ. No wonder he says, the one who spoke with Abraham was me. The one who spoke with Moses was me. Before Abraham, I am. Matthew Henry says in his commentary, being self-existent, he cannot but be self-sufficient, and therefore all-sufficient, and the inexhaustible fountain of being and bliss, that he is eternal and unchangeable, and always the same yesterday, today, and forever. He will be what he will be, and what he is. That's the God we serve. No one can stop God's plan. And that's amazing. Because although we have been created with freedom of choice, if our freedom is trying to put a stop to God's plan, master plan, our plans will not succeed. What happened when Herod wanted to kill all the babies in Bethlehem? Did he succeed in killing Jesus? Couldn't. How many times was Jesus, were there attempts of murder on Jesus? How many times before his crucifixion? Many times, and over, what is it that the Bible says? His time was not yet. Because you and I cannot alter God's plan. Because we serve an all-sufficient God, a self-existent God, a God that is self-sufficient, that is almighty, that he has inexhaustible fountains of being and bliss. I mean, this is the eternal God, the unchangeable God. Notice the description in the book of Revelation that God himself says about himself in Revelation 1:8. I am the Alpha and the Omega. I am the one who is, who always was, and who is coming. I am the all-powerful. So what's your excuse? If the all-powerful God is calling you to do something, what's your excuse? And you would think that Moses first says, well, who am I? God gives an answer. Well, don't worry about that. Worry about who's going to be with you. I'm going to be with you. But God, what I'm going to say? I don't know what to say. If they say, what's your name? What I'm going to say? You tell them, I am who I am. You would think that after two excuses being refuted, Moses says, okay, God, I got it. I'll go. No. There's still more. So Moses comes up with a third excuse, and you can read this in Exodus chapter 4, verse 1. Then Moses answered and said, but suppose they will not believe me or listen to my voice. Suppose they say the Lord has not appeared to you. What am I going to do? If they won't believe me, if they won't listen to me. Which is very interesting. Because if we go 5 verses before Exodus 4:1, if we go to Exodus 3:18, notice what God has already told Moses. Exodus 3:18, the Bible says, God telling Moses, then they will what? Heed your voice. They will what? They will heed your voice. They will listen to you. And you shall come, and you and the elders of Israel, to the king of Egypt, and you shall say to him, the Lord God of the Hebrews has met with us, and now please let us go 3 days' journey. God has already told Moses they will listen to you, and now Moses, even though God has already told him that, says, but God, what if they don't listen to me? What? When I was in college, I had a professor that told me this once, and I've never forgotten, and I'm trying to teach my kids this. He said, when you give an excuse, your real friends won't need them, and your enemies won't believe them. So the excuses are only for you.
Say it again.
Your friends won't need your excuses, and your enemies won't believe them. So excuses are just for you to quench your conscience, for you to come out. Think about it. Every time you have given an excuse, was it really a reason? Because there's a difference between an excuse and a reason. And Moses is just coming excuse after excuse, trying to say, no, I don't want to go, I don't want to go, I don't want to go. Send someone else, I'm not fit, I think you made a mistake. And his friend doesn't need that excuse. So anyways, Moses says, they would not listen to me. They would not believe me. And what is God's answer? I'll give you the power to perform 3 signs. If you tell them this is what's going to happen and they don't believe you, 3 signs you can read in the book of Exodus. These are the 3 signs in chapter 4. The first one, you will turn the rod into a snake. So God says, what's that in your hand? And Moses, well, this is a rod, a shepherd's rod. He said, okay, that's what I'm going to use. And he says, Moses, throw that on the ground. And Moses threw it on the ground. And what happened to the rod? It turned into a snake. And then God says, Moses, pick up that snake from its tail. And Moses picked up the snake from his tail. And what happened to the rod? To the snake? Turn it to a rod. Which is fascinating because, you know what? If you are an expert snake handler, like if you are Steve Irwin, who is deceased. Do you remember who Steve Irwin was? Talk about him? Yeah. Like he will grab snakes by its tail, right? But most professionals won't do that. You want to know why? Because if you grab a snake by its tail, what is the easiest thing that a snake can do to you?
Bite you.
Bite you. They can turn around and bite you. I mean, you're exposed. So most people grab it by their head. Why do you suppose God asked precisely to Moses to grab that snake by its tail? There could be many reasons, but I can think of, you know what? I want you to trust me. That snake is not going to harm you. Just like that fire in that bush didn't harm the bush, I'm not going to harm you. And all these things that I'm declaring that you will do, not going to harm you. By the way, did any of the 10 plagues harm the Israelites? None of them. The Egyptians were in 4 days of total darkness, and there was light in Goshen. The Egyptians were, oh, my throat, oh, I'm so thirsty. The Nile River is turning to blood, and there were Israelites drinking water like nothing. Because God has promised, I'll be with you. Do not fear. Do not fear. And I wonder how many of you have felt recently God calling you to do something, and all you're bringing to God is excuses. I can't, God, you know, this, and that. Who am I? Anyways, that's the first sign. What is that in your hand? By the way, you know what? What is that in your hand? What do you have? You know, one of the founders of our church, her name is Ellen White, she wrote this. She said, the Lord can do wonders even with the simplest instrumentalities. God took 12 unlearned fishermen, tax collectors, 12 rough men, and he changed the known world with 12 men. And the same question he asked Moses, what is that in your hand? He's asking you here at Cambridge, what's that in your hand? What do you have? Well, God, I only have cows. Well, guess what? That's all God needs. God, all I have is books because I'm in college. That's all God needs. Well, God, all I have is my carpentry shop because I'm retired. That's all God needs. God has given all of us at least one thing, and it doesn't matter if it's big or small, that one thing will be more than enough for God to use and do the great thing He wants you to do. But we have to believe that. We really have to. So the second sign, you will put your hand in your bosom, and then he put his hand in, and that would freak me out. Like, put your hand in and go, whoa, and all of a sudden your hand is white as snow. It's full of leprosy. Like, what? And then, oh yeah, put it back in. Oh, it's clean. Like, wow, it's in seconds. And God says, okay, those are the 2 signs that if they don't believe you, you'll do these 2 things, they will believe you. But even if they don't believe those 2 things, there's one more thing. And I don't know if you knew this, but this is in Exodus chapter 4. God says, you will go to the Nile River, you will get some water, and you will bring it in front of the elders, and you will drop the water on the ground, and that water will turn into blood. They will believe you. And I can see Moses like, all right, what can I say next? Okay, who am I? Didn't work. What's your name? Okay, what if they don't believe me? Okay, 3 supernatural things. Okay, what am I going to say next? And of course, he had one more card under his sleeve, and this is in Exodus chapter 4, verse 10. Then he says, God, I'm not eloquent. Let's read it. Exodus 4, verse 10. Then Moses said to the Lord, oh my Lord, I am not eloquent, neither before nor since you have spoken to your servant, but I am slow of speech and slow of tongue. And some people have actually say that Moses had a stuttering problem. Is that how you say that? Stuttering? Like Geo sometimes do that. But you know what? That is not the case. I really don't believe that. Notice what Stuart in his book Exodus says. He says, there is no evidence anywhere in the Bible that Moses had any lack of skill in speech, public or private. And overwhelming evidence to the contrary. And this is why we know that this was just another lame excuse that Moses is giving God. I'm slow in tongue. I don't know how to speak it. What was Moses really telling God? And I think this will become clear if I ask this question. Raise your hand if you speak more than one language. If you speak 2 languages or more. All right. 3 of us. Okay. So what happens if for 40 years, what's your second language, Fiona?
German.
All right. What happens if for 40 years you don't speak German at all?
That's about right.
Okay. All right. So you're the modern Moses. Okay. So can you engage right now? Like if some German comes, can you engage in a fluent conversation with a German person?
Pretty much.
Okay. How about you, Shirley?
Spanish.
All right. Can you engage in a fully conversation with someone in Spanish?
Pretty much.
Okay. Okay. Well, that was not what I was expecting, but that's okay. All right. I'll give you my example. Okay. I moved from Puerto Rico to Michigan in 2003. I am 23 years old. And I had like this heavy Puerto Rican accent. Like I will go anywhere in Michigan and people will go like, you Puerto Rican? Yeah. People will know, okay? And I made a promise to myself. Like I swore under heaven, like God is my witness. I swore that I will never, ever, ever forget Spanish. Because the fact of the matter is that I have so many relatives that live in the States, and within 5 years, they don't even know Spanish at all. I don't want to do that. You fast forward, 15 years later, it's 2018. And at my house, we only speak Spanish. And we're having a problem with our kids now because among themselves, they're speaking English. And when we caught them, we said, Spanish only. But guess what happens to Dad? Sometimes Dad is talking with his kids, and he goes like, yeah, kids, because you know that, how do you say that in Spanish? How do you say that? I already forgot. And it's been 15 years. Can you imagine 40 years to Moses? Not speaking one word of Egyptian. That's why I'm really surprised, Fiona and Shirley, that you go like, yeah, I can do it.
I can understand what they're saying. Let's just say that you forget the
Okay.
vocabulary, even
Right.
though you know the language.
Right. So this is what's happening to Moses. Moses' excuse is, God, I haven't spoken Egyptian in 40 years. I'm going to not only stutter, I'm going to do the ridicule if I go there in front of Pharaoh. Notice this. This is Ellen White in the book Pictures and Prophets. She says, Moses had been so long away from the Egyptians that he had no so clear knowledge and ready use of their language as when he was among them. That's the problem. And it makes total sense. Actually, we can even argue that right now Moses is not really sort of giving an excuse more than a real reason. Like, God, I really have this problem. But it was really an excuse still. You know what I mean? So Moses, what is God's answer to this? God says, this is another evidence. Okay, so we know that he had a language problem. But notice what Stephen says before he was stoned in the book of Acts chapter 7. Describing Moses. He says, Moses was given the best education in Egypt. He was a strong man. And what are the next 2 words? And a what? A powerful speaker. That doesn't sound like someone that has problems speaking. Anyways, I'm not eloquent, God. I forgot the language. What is God's answer? Again, I will be with you. Not only with you. Now he says, I will be with your mouth and will teach you what to say. What a confirmation. So for every excuse, God has a response and a solution. And now Moses have reached the end of the road and he's going like, okay, God, I'm going to have to be honest with you. It's not who am I. It's not who are you, what am I going to say you are. It's not that I'm not eloquent. It's not that they won't believe me. You want to know my real reason? And this you can find in the book of Exodus 4:13. Moses says he begged to God, Lord, please send someone else. At the end of the day, this is the real reason for his excuses. He simply doesn't want to do it. And who will blame him? How many of you older folks will love for you to, for God to call you to do the job you were doing when you were 40? Yeah. I don't want to go. I don't want to go. In the words of Kale and Delitzsch, they say Moses' difficulties were now all exhausted and removed by the assurances of God. But this only brought to light the secret reason in his heart. He did not wish to undertake the divine mission. And I don't blame Moses. I don't know if you would. This excuse, as Ellen White says, this excuse is at first proceeded from humility and diffidence, but after the Lord had promised to remove all difficulties and to give Moses final success, then any farther shrinking back and complaining of his unfitness showed distrust of God. And I love it because you know what? If there was anyone that was complaining all the time, it was the people of Israel. As a matter of fact, and we can actually do a study about this, their biggest sin was complaining. And here we see their leader in the same round. What else? She said it implied a fear that God wasn't able to qualify him for the great work to which he had called him, or that he had made a mistake in the selection of the man. So God is calling you to do great things. God is calling this Cambridge church to do great and mighty things. What's going to be our excuse? I don't want to do it. You know, I think God wants to do great things in our life, in our families, at work, in our church, in our neighborhood, in our community, great things. And everything, however small or insignificant in our eyes, is great for God. Because if God was able to use a rod to open a sea, what's our excuse? Which begs the question, what is our excuse? And I'll give you 6. There might be more. But these are some of the excuses that I have come up with, or that you have come up with, when God calls you or the church for a mission, to do something great. First excuse, I'm too old. Or the opposite, I'm too young. I'm only in college. I don't have the experience. I don't know. Well, think about the examples in the Bible. How old Moses when he delivered the people of Israel? 80. How old was Moses when he finally was able to retire? 120 years old. Yeah, you heard that. 120. 120. Age is not a barrier for God to use you. How old was King Josiah? Josiah, was it? When he became a king. How old? 9. 9. Did he do great things for the Lord? But of course. Because the promise is, it doesn't matter if you're 100 years old or 9 years old, the promise is, I will be with you. That's all it takes. Second excuse that we come up with, I've never done it. I have no experience. 0. Well, that's not a problem for God. God can teach you. For those of you who see movies, and I'm sorry, older generation might not know this movie, but there's a movie called The Matrix. Everybody see The Matrix here? Okay. So, come on. I know more than 2 people have seen The Matrix here.
I've seen the advertisement
Okay, anyways, there's a scene, there's something in this movie that I love, and I think this is how God's going to do it in heaven. Okay, so this guy is like the new guy, and he's going to be trained, but he has no idea how to fight. So they plug him into a computer, they download this disc of all sorts of martial arts that have ever existed, and it takes 3 seconds. Download it, and already he's fighting like Bruce Lee, and doing the moves, and doing everything, like in 3 seconds. That's how the Holy Spirit works. At Pentecost, how long did it take to the disciples to start speaking in unknown languages? Seconds. As a matter of fact, there's a far creepy story in the Bible, and I don't know if you ever remember this, but do you remember when Philip was one day walking, and this is so funny. Philip is walking one day, I'm Jesus' disciple, and I'm going to preach, and all of a sudden God just takes him from where he was and dump him in some other place. Like, what? Is it like Star Trek? Like the teletransport thing? That's what the Spirit does. So what does it matter if you have no experience? What does it matter if you've never done it? God can teach you in a split second. It's not an excuse. Number 3, of course, fear. That's more legit. Like, yeah, I'm afraid of stepping into the unknown because I've never done that. But you have to remember that God has promised to be with you. Actually, it's not even you doing anything. It's God through you. It wasn't Moses freeing the Israelites. It was God through Moses. Because we're nothing. The reality is that if we want to take that question from Moses, who am I? The answer from God should have been, you're no one. You're nobody. But with me, story changes. Oh, I love this one. God, how am I going to do that? I have no money. I'm broke. I have nothing. Well, really? Do you think that's a barrier for God? The God, the I am who I am, the God who owns every single currency in this planet. Like he says in the Bible, there was no bills in his temple. He says that all the gold and silver is mine. And what? And the cattle, like everything belongs to him. Money is not a barrier. What happened? Let's go back to Scripture and find support for this. What happened when some people came to Jesus or to Peter and said, "Hey, does your master pay taxes?" And Peter goes like, "Yeah, he does." Teacher, do we pay taxes? Have you heard that story? Yeah, he does. Jesus, do we pay taxes or not? Jesus engaged in a conversation there, and then he says, "Peter, just go to the lake, grab a fish. The first one you grab, open his mouth. There's going to be a coin. Pay your taxes and mine." Was money a problem? Not at all. This is just excuses from our part. Number 5, we are too small of a church. Pastor, we can't do that. We're only 5 people or 10 or 15. Well, the opposite is also true. Oh, Pastor, we're such a big church. We're 5,000 member church. How can we do that? Success is not in the numbers. And I pray that you will memorize that. Last time I was with you, we talked about how does a healthful church looks like. Anybody remembers? I wonder. Because a healthy church is not a church that has all its pews full of people. That could be actually a dying church. If all there is bickering and disunity and fights among its brethren, that's a dying church. But a church with 20 people, 12 people that are loving Jesus and loving each other, that's a healthy church. That's the church I want to be in. That's the church I want to be part of. It's not about the numbers. So it doesn't matter if we are too small of a church or too big of a church. It doesn't matter. With God, that is just but an excuse. And last but not least, I don't know if you'll be able to see it. I don't have time. How many times I've said that? I don't have time, God. I'm a pastor of 3 churches. I have a wife and 3 kids. I have things to do. And God goes like, well, let me think about that. 24 hours every day. Yeah, you do the math. 24 hours. And we come to God, I have no time. I don't know if you have experienced this, but when, I can say this in my life, when I put God first in my life, like every morning, first thing I do, I spend time with God, all of a sudden, I can accomplish more things that day than the days that I wake up and say, oh, it's 8 o'clock. Oh, I have so many things to do. And I wake up, brush my teeth, start doing all things. I can only accomplish like 3 things. I wonder if there's anybody here that have experienced that. Because that's not a barrier. So what's your excuse? You know, for any excuse that you come up with, and with this will close, God will tell you the same thing He told Moses. I will be with you. That's it. I'll be with you. Just trust me. When you don't have money, I'll find money. When you don't have time, I'll find you the time. When you don't know how to speak, I'll teach you what to say. When you are afraid, I'll remove your fear. I'll be with you. I will be with you. So what's the call that God is giving you? What is it that God has been calling you lately to do, and you're like, no, come on, God, stop kidding. Like, nah, me at this age, come on. Like, really? God wants to do something great for you, through you. Will you let Him? But we can't come up with excuses, because His promise that He will be with us.